Hello, hello. Sorry, no countdown. We're running a little late, but we are back with this month's Editor's Desk. I'm Monique Curry Mims, and I'm the editor in chief of Generosity.
And I'm Dionysia Roberson, and I'm the managing editor of Generosity.
Awesome. So, thank you for joining us again for this episode. This month, we are talking about elections, democracy, and voice. And I don't know about you guys, but I attended a watch party for the debate, and boy, was it interesting. One, because of the candidates and their conversation, but just also being in a room full of people who get the issues, who are there to really challenge what was being said. Like, we really wish, I mean, we're
Mhm.
in Philadelphia, like, we wish there was an audience, we wish there was a way to engage. Because I think a lot of people also did think that regardless of who was speaking, there weren't a lot of details. Um,
Right.
and I think that this month particularly, there's been a lot going on in terms of our democracy. From that debate, this week is the UN General Assembly. I actually just got back from the Clinton Global Initiative, where democracy and voting and inclusion was a big topic in New York City. And then, last night there was the unfortunate execution of an innocent man, who the prosecutor in the case was trying to reopen it. And our Supreme Court decided to not overturn his execution, and the governor, who did overturn some other things for some other people who did something, decided that this innocent person did not deserve to live. And I think that there's a lot to talk about in terms of what's happening in our democracy, which we're not going to get totally into because we are not political correspondents. But we are journalists. We do have a media outlet, and we do have a responsibility to the public and the truth that we share. Um, One of the things that I wanted to lift up was that yesterday, when I was at CGI, I was at CGI Monday and Tuesday, but yesterday I was able to hear from Anthony Marks, who is the director of the New York Public Library, and was
Uh,
really talking about the importance of the library and how a lot of public services are going away, but the library is not, fortunately, going away, but that the library is more than just books. And we recently did a series called More Than Books on the Philadelphia Public Library System. But he talked about the importance of storytelling and the stories that are in books. And, he said that if we can't learn from each other's stories and respect each other, then we can't have a democracy. And that it's really the young people, right? It's the young generation. It's our generation. It's the people under us who either have already or may be losing hope in our system. We recently did an article, Young People in Democracy, where a lot of college students or college age students are disillusioned. Um, they know their voice matters, but they know that we have a system that might not be listening to their voice, and that we have candidates that are running for office that aren't representative of them and aren't really talking to their needs or care about their needs. And they're now dealing with the repercussions of older generations and the decisions and policies that they make. I'm rambling, but there's a lot going on,
yeah.
people. But I want to get into some details around journalism and how we at Generosity, or how we just as a sector of journalists and storytellers, what role do we play in strengthening this democracy and trying to change this outlook to really focus on the issues and the changes that need to happen?
Ooh, yeah.
Not
That is
nothing too easy, nothing too hard today,
you know, right? Just world changing,
Just
earth
world
shattering
changing
questions. That's
questions.
all. Well, like the whole point of journalism is as like a tool of accountability,
Yeah.
specifically for democracy. Whatever kinds of buzzwords that people like to coin around journalism, like watchdog, or like all of our austere kind of status is directly tied to the preservation of democracy.
Yeah.
And so like it definitely works in that way, asterisk, when it's done right and when it's done in that spirit of stewardship.
Yeah.
So like the fundamental of our job is to inform people, And in a democracy, the main thing that you would want to always be aware of at all times is, are your elected officials doing the thing that they said that they were going to do? Are they doing what you elected them to do? And if not, why? And it's like you had spoken to earlier when you were talking about, there's a lot of conversation and discourse flying around about like democracy and threats to democracy and the candidates, and very few details.
Right.
And I think that as a sector, like as journalists, I think that our role in this case is maybe not necessarily to chase down the wacky, sensational things that are happening, because there are times when it can feel like, those images of geysers just kind of like shooting up out of the ground. Like
Right. Right.
that's what the news landscape is like when politics and society and pretty much every topic is so incendiary and so divisive. The impulse can really be to sort of chase down those things because that's where the story is. But
Right.
that's where the commitment should be. And in the chasing around, we are maybe losing sight. We're taking our fingers off the buttons and not monitoring systems and policies and processes for whether or not they're actually working for us. And we're not noticing that until it's too late and we're in the middle of things not working for us.
Yeah.
So I think that like a definite thing that journalism can do is to kind of get back in touch with those roots, those like accountability, democracy watchdog, those roots where we are actually the institution that is that oversight. We are able to report on whether or not officials, systems, and policies are delivering on what they promised to do. And we have the platforms and the arenas to inform people and help them to mobilize and organize in the event that these things are failing them. So I think that is absolutely the role of journalism in these times. Um, could we be doing more of that in general? Yes, absolutely. I think so, for sure. And then, of course, community narratives. Like whether you're talking as a component of journalism or not, just humans sharing stories among one another, that's always going to be the most valuable thing in learning directly from people in their own words, from their own perspective, through their own eyes, exactly what it is that they care about. Like what's important to people, what are their fears and motivations, what are they trying to preserve. And so if we're talking about strengthening democracy and democracy as being like a vehicle for the will of the people,
Hmm.
I can't imagine a more direct pathway to understanding and interpreting the will of the people than that direct storytelling through line from person to person. I feel like community narratives is always going to be the thing that saves the world, in my opinion. Like you can always leverage story to get closer to one another for whatever you need to do that for. So that's my take on a really huge and multifaceted question.
I so I had a colleague or a peer who wrote an op-ed, and they wrote the op-ed and they sent it to the Inquirer. And I said, you don't have to, and this isn't a like I'm upset thing, but why don't you post your op-ed with generosity, since that's really what our focus is. And he said, "Oh, you know what? Like, I actually read Generosity, but I don't know if the mayor's administration reads Generosity." So I put it in the outlet that I thought that they would read. Like, I know they get this paper every morning. And that just makes me think like there are so many community narrative, community based outlets that have these insights that are able to see how policies are impacting communities, whether it's directly saying it or you're just hearing stories about something that's going on, but you know that you just changed the policy that's impacting that.
Right.
But they're not reading these outlets, right? They're reading
Right.
these other outlets. What should small, independent, community led based outlets, like what should we be doing? What should they be doing to really make sure that like what we're producing and what we're sharing is getting to those people?
Mm. The first thing that comes to mind, I would say, is like collaboration and saturation. It's
Mm.
it's really hard for individual small outlets to make a lot of noise, even when their content is very compelling, if it's not getting in front of the right people. But there is massive benefit to small outlets collaborating with one another, um, republishing stories, amplifying stories, kind of flinging yourself out of your own limited orbit and like following the momentum of all of the people that you're collaborating with is one thing. And I think I've seen that lead to some measure of saturation, because it's not being in the right outlet that gets in front of the right people isn't the only way to get in front
Right.
of the right people. You know, it's the most direct way. In some cases, it's the easiest way, but there are other ways to get eyes on you. Those eyes specifically, you can take a circuitous route, i.e., through collaboration and republishing, just be everywhere, end up everywhere. You know, that piece will be posted so many times that it's almost impossible to avoid. It's like algorithmically locked in. So someone will see it. People of consequence will end up seeing it. And there are numerous examples of collaboratives, news collaboratives that work. Um, I That's the first thing that comes to my mind is just join up and get it out there as much as humanly possible.
So I'm actually here recording live from the AFP Leading Philanthropy Conference where I was speaking about half an hour ago. So I'm in a room full of nonprofits and, talking to them about, building impact together, being able to understand the communities that they're working with, understanding those narratives and utilizing those narratives to advocate because
Mhm.
nonprofits are like some of the best people to have the insights to give to local leaders. And so I guess my question to you is, I mean, I know how people pitch to generosity,
Yeah.
but when it comes to really being able to say, we're going to take these narratives and do something other than produce marketing materials and really be able to, whether it's to write an op-ed or to pitch a story to an outlet, what should community organizations be doing? What insights can you give them?
I
I feel like
would
this is like an interview for you, like you're
I
me.
know. No, this is fun though, because surprisingly, I think I have an idea for that.
Okay.
Um, I would say, and I don't know how pie in the sky this sounds, but I think that there should be an intentional effort, to create a structure and a platform for collecting community narratives, that
Okay.
can exceed the boundaries of newsrooms. So, if we're talking nonprofits, perhaps nonprofits will find it worthwhile to have someone on staff whose entire job it is to collect narratives from people who are impacted
Love
by the
it.
work that they do or from people who are impacted by policies. I think it's worthwhile. When you're trying to introduce a program that's not necessarily standard, you're always going to get a little bit of pushback. And I think some people would argue, oh, but there are arenas and platforms for op-eds. You can have somebody, everybody knows that you can walk into any newsroom and talk to a reporter or, submit an op-ed on your own, which is true to an extent. But we're talking about removing barriers, because
Yeah.
collecting these narratives is beneficial to both the nonprofits and the decision makers more so than it is a boon or an opportunity for exposure for the community member themselves. So make it easy, make it really, really easy. And I personally, being as committed to community narratives as I am, I think that every single office that aims to help people or create policies that serve people needs to also have something, some kind of structure installed where they are communicating directly with people, the people that they serve, getting those stories in whatever form they are. If it's sitting down and interviewing with people on a regular basis and making that their full time job so that they have the time to actually build these relationships, right? Like these long, protracted kinds of exchanges so that you're actually learning, really genuinely learning and not just guessing. Um,
Love this.
I don't think I'm the only one who would find that worthwhile. I feel like I've pitched this out in the world before, and people are like, oh, but if you want to hear people's voices, you just encourage them to write an op ed. And it's like, yeah, but
Right.
remove them barriers. There are, as much as, I love receiving op-eds and we try to create low barrier, but like I'm talking no barrier, because it is more crucial for these organizations and these nonprofits to gain these stories than it is for the people in question to share them with those particular nonprofits. So there's like a clear exchange here. It is absolutely worthwhile. And I'm not just saying that because I do believe that community narratives will save the world. I think it's a worthwhile investment.
No, I love it. I love it. I know pushback could be, oh, funding. Who's going to pay for this? But like, I love
Right,
the idea. All right.
right.
So since we're talking about nonprofits and I'm at this conference, I'm trying to like be quiet, but not be quiet. Um, what about, let's talk about the local lens,
Yeah,
right? Of these things, right? Like, let's bring this home. When we were at a housing summit last month, so last month, I guess it was last month,
it was. Wow.
and a local funder came up to us and discussed the idea that certain promises that the previous administration made around supporting homelessness and supporting people who are unhoused through tiny homes and through other avenues has ended because the new administration didn't like that plan or didn't believe that. So, millions of nonprofit or foundation dollars are now sitting in limbo because they were to support projects. But also, people are still now without housing and still dealing with some of these things. And, that takes me back, or I mean, it's a list, right? There's Chinatown, right? There's, you know, a whole community that is possibly about to be disrupted because of this new stadium. And not for nothing, but that community just got a whole big settlement because the state had disrupted their community with the highway.
Yeah. Yep.
Like,
Do we
we
ever learn?
do we ever learn? So when going back to like holding people accountable, what one through narratives, but then also two just as outlets, like what should we really be doing to bring these stories to light, right? Like these issues, I mean, people have been marching and protesting, writing letters, um, having meetings with the administration, without the administration. And I feel like the region is at this like precipice or this like inflection point because it's becoming a little divisive. And it's going back to voting for people, voting for leaders, and our ability to or not hold to hold them or not to hold them accountable. That was a lot of rambling, but like what I don't know, like, where do we go from here? Like, where do we go with our stories? And I know we're going to focus a lot of this next month in our reporting, but
Yeah.
where are some things that readers have to look to? But also, what are some things that community members, what narrative should they be telling that need to be heard, or where should they be heard?
Mm. That's another huge one.
I know.
Man, this is deep.
I just came back from Clinton Global. I'm thinking on these really
Right?
big
It's
scale.
like huge scale thinking. I love this so much. I feel like the first thing I'm moved to think of is just like consistency with a narrative arc. I think that's what outlets can do. Um, because I think sometimes there are people or like community members who aren't necessarily, say, take Chinatown for example, right?
Hmm.
If you're from a community outside of Chinatown, you've never
Hmm.
lived in Chinatown, you're not particularly well versed in the history or historical struggles of Chinatown in Philly, you you might struggle to gain a comprehensive sense of what the argument is, what the impact is, from the way that the news does tend to kind of flicker its lens. Um,
Mm.
so a lot of what we do is we'll spotlight an issue and then we'll spend an inordinate amount of time highlighting people's responses to the responses to the issues rather than so we'll say, uh, people in Chinatown are very upset at this prospect. And, people in this office are very resistant to that upset. And people over here are very curious as to why there's so much. And it's like, that's not the story. The story is the extended arc of the narrative of what is
Yeah.
happening. Why is this happening? When did it start happening? What's the impact? Who is it going to affect? How do those people feel? What are they doing about it without the extra periphery? So I think in terms of like what outlets can do, I think it might just be like committing to a definitive arc that almost kind of shuts out the background noise. And I
Interesting.
think as a reader, I would look for that. It, particularly divisive is the word that you use, particularly on issues that are divisive. I personally am turned off by any article or any from any outlet, regardless of my relationship to them, that like feeds into that divisiveness. So like I really love the New Yorker magazine. Like I read I have certain outlets that I read all the time. Ours excluded because I'm a huge fan. We are perfect. But I like there are times when I've clicked on the New York Times and I've read an article that kind of like reinforces language that almost like
Mm,
fuels the divisive trigger response. And
yeah,
it feels like baiting to me. And so my brain will shut down. And I'll be like, what I'm looking for is an unfolding, a reasonable and logical unfolding of this event. I don't need my feelings triggered. I'm an intellectual. I don't need my emotions to be tugged at and manipulated in order to get me to respond or think or do. That's just not, and I can sense when that's happening and it upsets me. And I assume many readers are exactly the same. And so I think that as journalists, as outlets, we'd be doing the greatest service to readers to just like, in a nutshell, like stick with the story, follow the story, don't lose the thread. No matter what shiny things are happening on the side, like don't lose the thread because that's what people are looking for. And I, as somebody who's not a community member from Chinatown, would benefit from that kind of cohesive,
yeah,
really comprehensive across outlets, right? It would be nice to be able to open any news and like follow up with any article and see a progression of the story
yeah.
rather than anything else.
That's something that we've tried to do because there's so many outlets now. We're like, okay, what's the other angle, or what's
Right,
the angle that the community m- needs to be a part of and needs to actually
right,
understand? You know, Jason Kelsey had a lot to say when the mayor showed her support behind the new stadium. And the one thing that struck me, because he came back to clarify what he meant, which was still the same, but also he said, 10 years or so from now, when it's complete and it's up and running, like we might have a different feeling about it. But right now, it's totally disrupting the community. And it made me think of two things. One, 10 years plus from now, that community that was fighting for it is totally gone. So
right.
there's no one pushing
The
back on
disruption
it.
already
The
happened.
disruption already happened. But then the other thing is, well, 10 years plus from now, who's really benefiting? And it's going to be the young people, right? They're going to be the ones that are going to be applying for those jobs.
Right.
They're going to be the ones whose tax dollars are support, whatever the case may be. And not that older generations aren't, but a lot of these people are going, maybe they moved away, right? Or maybe,
Yeah.
these dollars are going to impact education. These dollars are so W- I mean, we started this conversation on youth or young people and disillusionment, and being able to really talk about their voice. I haven't heard any youth voice in any of this. And we're talking about hiring businesses now, like, oh, they've got these commitments and they got this now. But who's to say in 10 years that business is going to be around? Or who's to say in 10 years, like, this community or the city has been so gentrified that the population has changed and the businesses that fought for it and the communities that did fight for it aren't even really at present anymore or even benefiting from it the way they thought. How do we support youth in talking about their futures? Because their futures are the ones that are going to be more directly impacted by this than anything else.
Yeah.
Outside of the Chinatown population, I'll say second to Chinatown,
Right.
youth.
I think just definitely turning that lens on our young people, and providing so much more of a platform to hear from them. Like, do we even know what young people's hopes are for this arena? Like, have we even heard like whether there's excitement or
Hmm.
whether there's like, do we even have we even taken that much of a pulse check at this
Yeah,
point? And I really don't think that we have. So that would be one, like moving aside, um, because we do like Jason Kelsey. Great. It feels like we make room for everybody else's opinion, and we still aren't asking our kids anything substantial. Like this is indeed their city, but we're gonna front page publish this like other person's discourse first and suppress theirs. So it's like let's provide that platform. And then also just in the future, I think as a city, we could start really trying to do better than looping young people into the conversation after decisions have been all but finalized. Like I think I think we should be, since we are trying to invest in the futures of our young people, we should be involving them in the decisions that we make now. Because, like you said, the ones who are going to be the most impacted 10 years from now are them. So the fact that they have no say, no voice, no presence whatsoever in this landscape of decision making, um, is both a disservice to them and to us. So I think as journalists, we have those platforms and we can help provide them. That is our superpower. We have the mic, we have the voices, we have the ink, we have the paper, we have these tools and we can share them. And I think it's our responsibility to do that.
definitely. And shameless plug, maybe not a shameless plug, but can you see this?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
I think
Okay.
it's just small for me because my screen is small, but it should be big for everyone else. I just made it bigger.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
This is our event that's coming up. We are hosting a youth forum on public safety advocacy and voting on October 10th from 4 to 6 p.m. In partnership with NOMO Foundation, which is where the event will be held, 925 North Broad Street. Also, we will have partnership with Bolt and PA Youth Vote. Bolt will be there on site.
Yeah.
Nomo and Bolt will be providing panelists. This is really a youth centered event. We want to uplift youth voices, and PA Youth Vote will be on site to register young people to vote and to share about the importance of voting and going beyond voting. We really need to make sure that it's beyond the ballot. Right, we're not just voting and going away, or hitting, democracy or Democrats all the way down or Republicans all the way down. That
Right.
we're voting for candidates that are speaking to our needs and also holding them accountable
Yep. Consistently over time.
consistently over time. And as journalists, we have to do that within the work that we do, really making sure that, we are providing these insights, right? That people know, we're not just saying, oh, this new shiny policy was just made or this new shiny
Right.
funding was just provided, but being able to track it and hold people accountable and uplift the voices so that we know if actually how it's actually impacting that community.
Yes.
um, we don't have any questions. So, it's 1 o'clock. So, we can end it here. I don't know if there's any final thoughts you have, Dio.
I just I am reminded, as always during this season, of the importance of narrative empowerment, whatever that looks like for you. Now is the time to be owning your story, owning your reality, owning your voice, projecting that voice, um, and really just kind of making it known. Um, it's it's a cyclical thing. It happens every now. It's almost like Christmas, You're like, it's that season, and it reminds me of goodwill. Like this is the time of the season that always reminds me of agency and speaking up and using whatever tools we have at our disposal to declare our existences.
Yes.
So happy declaration of existence, y'all. Like, let's
Love
keep
that.
it going.
Look, we shouldn't even have to declare it. We're here. Own it. We really got to
Right.
own it.
Own it.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the Editor's Desk. We are here the last Wednesday of every month at 12:30. We hope you join us again next month, and we will see you soon.
Bye.